Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode with Dr. Jordan and Dr. Lynn. We're so excited for this episode today because we've been talking about it for so long. But today we're going to be talking about reconnecting with your ancestry. And me and Jordan are going to dive into a little bit of our ancestry, our history. We're going to be talking about different topics along the lines of reconnecting with ancestral lands and just sharing generational wisdom and also dive into some things that you can do to integrate and bring some of these tools into your life so you can reconnect with your ancestry. So, Jordan, let's dive into it today.
No, absolutely. And thank you for the introduction. I think the importance of this episode is being that we are both in America, we were raised here, and America kind of has some disconnection to ancestry just because of the way that our history has kind of gone. And I think a lot of our traumas directly come from a lack of tradition, a lack of ancestry, and a lack of connection to these things. And I think it's
Mm-hmm.
important to find ways to reconnect because I don't think there's many tools as available. We're constantly hearing about ancestral curses and trauma and baggage, but we're rarely told about the gifts, the healing, and
Mm.
the benefits of that work.
So true. I mean, I think it's become a lot more mainstream to talk about like ancestral healing these days. And the focus is very much like fixing a problem, fixing something that's, let's just say, wrong, right? Or things that have happened. And granted, there have been a lot of tragedies and a lot of different things that have happened to many different civilizations, cultures, lineages. But yes, I think there is such a big need to talk about the generational wisdom that exists within our bodies, that exists within our cultures. And I know that's like been my case for sure, is like learning how to almost just reframe so that way I can take and just learn and reclaim. I think it's more about reclaiming just this generational joy that exists within my family, my lineage, and my culture. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think it kind of goes with any, shadow work that is done is there's this misconception that we need to identify the bad thing, isolate it, and get rid of it. When in actuality,
Mm,
it's quite literally the exact opposite. Anyone who deals with, anxiety, depression, or any of these trauma responses will know that the more you try to get rid of it, the more you try to push it away, the more you try to isolate it, the
yeah.
stronger it gets. I mean, it builds the demon quite literally to isolate it. So I
Yeah.
think that a lot of this work is a lot less about identifying and isolating these parts of us, but it's more about integrating and working with them. And
Mm,
I think that that's going to be the beauty when I get discussing about my ancestry. And it's that, like, all of my gifts that I was given through ancestry, if, are utilized in the wrong way or get out of control or out of balance and temperance, so even speaking of, then they become the curse. It's not that there
mm-hmm.
is a gift and there is a curse, or it's all the same edges or same coin, different sides. And so I think it's
Yeah.
important to recognize that it's more so the expression of these things rather than these things themselves.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that. And let's talk about, since you started, like let's talk about your ancestry, where they're from, and
Yeah,
your
no,
lineage.
absolutely. And again, I think this is why this episode's so amazing, and it'll be very all inclusive because I feel like the two of us represent a huge portion of what American ancestry is, And so for
Mm,
me, I have lineage that come from Italy, Irish, and then from Africa. So I have a grandfather on my dad's side who is second generation Irish. Same thing on my dad's side. His grandmother is Italian, and then on my mom's side, we have two African lineages, and it really gave me a lot of a broad perspective because we know as far as many spectrums and scales go, my ancestry is very far on either, depending on what you want to use to measure. And I think
mm,
that I was able to see a lot of the diversity, a lot of the American struggle, and a lot of the adversity, so conflict between different races or groups, through
mm-hmm.
my ancestry because my ancestry was often on opposite sides of things. and I mean that with no judgment because it's just their perspectives and how things were. But there was definitely a lot of instances where there was conflicting ideas, conflicting, I didn't want to say morals, but conflicting perspectives on how the world was. And so I think it really gave me, once I grew up and was seeing the opposition, the polarity, the sides, it really gave me the space to see both with through equal lens and judge neither. So I think that that was an important revelation to have, and it's kind of giving me peace to not really be jarred and brought in either direction. That being
Mhm.
said, I want to just give a quick intro to some of your ancestry.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your ancestral story. I've heard it and it's always like inspiring to hear again because when we can reclaim our ancestry and what you said was integrate like these things back into ourselves because I feel like the way sometimes shadow work happens or like the trauma happens is like it fragments and we kind of like lose touch with these aspects of ourselves. And so that's been a big part of my journey. It's just like reclaiming like I am an Asian person. I am I have ancestors that come from Asia. My both my parents are Vietnamese. My mom is Vietnamese and Chinese, so she's half and half. And her dad came from China, specifically Guangzhou in that part of China. He immigrated to Vietnam and met my grandma on my mom's side, and then they had many kids. Just like I think like the older generation does, you just have like 8 to like 11 kids, and that's just normal to have a really big family back
Absolutely.
then. And my dad is from Vietnam. He's from a place called Da Nang, which is a beach town um, in Vietnam. And actually, I haven't met my grandparents on his side because they passed away early on in his life. And that doesn't mean that I don't feel them and I don't connect with them because I very much, even though I have not met like my grandma's on in both sides. I feel them so deeply and I feel them so connected to my path. And early on in my parents' lives, they immigrated to America for a better life and specifically during the time of the American War. It's interesting because in America, in the United States, we call it the Vietnamese War, the Vietnam War, but in Vietnam, they call it the American War. So I like to like
That is
switch it up
so mind blowing, and
and
it's
say,
obviously makes logical sense. But
right,
wow,
it's the
wow.
American war, and so I like to just say it like that because it was. They came into Vietnam, and there was obviously a lot going on during that time. But my parents immigrated during that time. They went to China first. Their stories are crazy, and it makes me realize that for them to both go on that like harrowing journey and like could possibly easily have like died during their immigration to China and then to the United States. I had a realization early on, I think maybe a few years ago, where I was like, what are the chances that these two people go on these harrowing journeys, come to the United States and meet, and I now exist because of that. Like that is so so beyond rare. Like the scientific chances of that is like 0.1%. So the fact that like I exist is like such a miracle, and like that's so many of us who our parents are immigrants and things like that. But since being in the United States, my parents like assimilated, and I grew up very much like having Asian Vietnamese culture at home, like going home, eating all the foods, eating pho, like all the things, and then leaving the house, stepping out of the door, and just like feeling American and growing up with both cultures. So, um, I definitely feel like there was a long time where I really identified with being American, and there was a lot of the time where I felt, I think, ashamed of being Asian, being ashamed of the culture because a lot of it was like hidden behind doors in the home, in the family life. And yeah, we could talk more about that, but that's a little bit about my ancestry and my ancestral story. I know we talked about before talking about these like the gifts and the curses. Can you share a little bit more about that, Jordan?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And thank you for sharing what you just shared because I think there's a few pieces in there that I actually haven't heard yet. That being said, yeah, no, it's funny. I was on a walk the other day and like really thinking about this topic and, because of course I know, I mean, all of what I am does come from my ancestry, my genetics, and all these things. And you think
Mhm.
about it growing up of, the things you got from your mom or your dad, and you don't realize that that is just a microcosm of your ancestry, of course. And so I really had to break it down into, just to compartmentalize and help communicate where I think those things come from. And I came up with a few just very basic, like broader spectrums of where I think these lineages and the types of gifts that they have offered me. And again, this is my personal experience, so I'm not making this as a broad assumption for these groups in general, but this is my personal experience. So to start off with my Italian lineage, and I see this a lot with a lot of Italian Americans, is I think the gift that we were given was just brute determination. And what I mean by determination is it's this aim towards physical security, this aim towards getting things done, this aim towards making a name for ourselves. And I think the best example of it is my Italian grandmother. I mean, a few things I probably never discussed with you. So my Italian grandmother, just like you were saying, she was from a generation where they had a lot of children. So she had 11 children.
Mhm.
During that time, she also ran a commercial dairy farm. During that time, she also ran a real estate agency. During that time, she also ran for Congress twice. And that was during a time where women weren't allowed to do any of those things to begin with. So that just goes to show how much more on top of the determination was there. So I
Yes.
definitely see in Italian culture, Italian American culture, we do have this brute determination. And I think that how that can sometimes be expressed as a curse, though, is determination when it's out of balance, lacks self care, it lacks taking pause, it lacks the balance in family, business, community, all of these things, and is a little bit skewed one way. So, although, of course, I think I would be nothing without this gift, I have to be reminded to slow down and to not
Mhm.
not overdo, to not overwork, to not push to exhaustion. So
Yeah.
that's kind of where that gift and curse lies.
Yeah.
And so moving on to my Irish ancestry, I think that gift that was given to me through them was this sense of drive. And the difference between the Irish drive that I'm speaking of and determination, how those words differ, is I think this drive is more aimless. It has no purpose, no function, no direction. It is just an energy that kind of pushes us forward. And I think that that
Mhm.
drive can result in negative things if it's not harnessed and not pushed into a certain direction. I think it can lead to substance abuse or it can lead to bad and crippling anxiety if it's not channeled in a direction. So I think that
Mhm.
the power of this drive is this pure energy and source to do things with it. But again, if things aren't done with it, it can then lead to this anxiety.
Mhm.
And last but not least is my African lineage. And I think that this is something that a lot of people with African lineage can associate with, and especially if they came from a slave lineage, is that the strength I got from that and the gifts I got from that was just this ability to adapt. It really is sometimes survival of the fittest. It really is this ability to just mold and mend and turn whatever you have into something. I mean, there's many stories of, African food, even like chicken wings and pig's feet coming out of that was what they were given at that time. So they had to make the best of it. And now these are foods that people covet. So I think the gift given from my African lineage was this adaptability. But I think the curse that can sometimes come with that is with the African lineage, I think sometimes we lose a sense of identity and a sense of self because we're always meant to adapt. So then who are we as a people if all we ever were was, molding and mapping around survival? So Yeah, that's kind of my basic overview. And I'm curious if any of that resonates with you, if there's any questions that exist in that,
Totally.
or if that made sense.
No, it honestly, all of it resonated with me, and I'm realizing how wild that is. Like, even though we come from very different lineages, very different cultures, at the very fundamental like base of it, like we're all humans and we're all like experiencing this human experience of like needing to survive. And so, how does that human survival, that need, form into what's happening in their environment and what's needed, right? And what their culture is like allowing for, even like built around, you know? And I just love that. I definitely resonate with the what I actually felt was like I recently went to Vietnam and I took a lot of time to just observe and just learn. And it connected so many dots for me in saying, oh, this is why my parents have this sort of energy towards like work.
Um,
Or this is why, they had this sort of understanding about this thing. And so it made me understand them on like a completely different level, because I think as a kid I rebelled a lot. I didn't understand my parents a lot and why they did certain things. And being raised in the American culture, when your parents were raised in a very different culture, that's what happens. Like there is sort of these like disconnections, these like kind of discrepancies that you don't understand as a American child, growing up in a different culture. You're like, whoa, like I didn't understand why my parents did that, but now I do. The number one thing was like unraveling the hustle culture, because in Vietnam people are like so resourceful. People are like creating businesses out of nothing. Like literally in Vietnam, they passed a law that you could own a business and create a business right outside of your door, right outside of your apartment, right outside of your home. So like most people in Vietnam have a business like doing whatever, like selling sugarcane juice or like selling food, right? Like people are so highly driven, and the work ethic is so strong and so resourceful, in that I think it turns into this like hustle culture that you're just always trying to make like just a little bit of money. And I see that even in my family now. Like I see my parents even in that mindset now, and it's hard to get away from that when that is so deeply connected to survival, when that's so deeply connected to like just getting enough money so you can buy rice for your family to eat. And it makes a lot of sense, like when I started breaking down like, okay, well, why is the hustle culture, like why is it so prominent? And I think that is so instilled in me growing up watching my parents work and like come home and like take care of all the kids. Like it was just so prominent in me, and I think in many ways it gave me a lot of drive, and my work ethic is like hands down I can put like 120% in something and like do the freaking job. But does that fully feel aligned to me, and will it burn me out in the end? Yes. And so those are the things I have to learn to balance, that sort of expression of like this resourcefulness, this drive, this need to kind of survive. And how I've sort of reframed that in myself is like, yes, I have this strong energy. Yes, I can do anything I put my heart and my mind to, but can I do it from a place that is not coming from pressure and deep responsibility, but can I do it from a place of like, I honor that and I honor my own wants and my own desires? And can I do it from a place of like genuine love for the thing? And I think that's also, I want to say, a privilege that I have too, because I think the older generation, they
they
didn't
had no
grow
other
up with
option.
that. Yeah, right, right. And then I also want to say the other thing, the other expression that I have is being very deeply empathic and being very sensitive. And I'm not exactly sure where I feel like in Asian culture, it's very much tied to family. It's very much tied to community. It's very collective based. And that to me feels like so much more of a sensitive energy. It feels like so much more of a like empathic energy, like, tuning into your kids to see what they need, like tuning into, oh, the family needs to eat right now. Let's like make sure we provide for the family so that they feel nourished and supported, right? And so there's this innate um sensitivity in me that I have that I've gotten through, I think, deep in my lineage of healers and of people that are very connected to nature, because I grew up seeing my mom like cook herbs and put it in our food. And like, I grew up very much with her talking to me about my body. Like, this is what fire is doing in your body, this is what wind is doing. And so I received those messages early on, and it made me very sensitive to energy. And that is oftentimes like my strength, especially when I'm doing any sort of holding space or just tuning into spirit or tuning into my ancestry. Like, it gives me such a it's like my superpower, but then at the same time it can show up as my weakness, where I do take on so much energy that's not mine, and I lose myself in that um oftentimes too, so it's about learning how to have boundaries with all of it. And so that's how my lineage is expressed through me. I love actually like going through that and talking about the gifts and the curses that we've received, because you're right, it is an expression, and it is finding a balance with that in ourselves.
Well, and I think something that was that we both touched based on, and you even reiterated, and I think that it's not something I learned until I actually worked with an ancestral coach a few years ago, and it's that we get into this our headspace because most of our ancestry did come from a need for survival, a need to hustle, a need to overachieve and determine because if they didn't, they quite literally wouldn't survive, and I think
Mm-hmm.
people then internalize that, then think, well, if my ancestry did this, if my grandparents did this, then it would be so disrespectful for me not to do that too, for me not to work
Mm-hmm.
hard, for me not to push myself, for me not to kill myself. And,
Yes.
I think that that's a very improper interpretation. And I was, posed the question that, your ancestors would much rather the opposite be true, that they did all of that suffering, all of that work, all that determination, so you didn't have to, So
Mm.
it's super respectful to actually to take that vacation, to relax, to have time off, because that's you honoring the hard work that they put in, so you were able to do that.
Yes. I love that. Yes.
And so
You know
I
that.
think that that's such an important review, and I think hearing about the need for that determination in your lineage too just really made me think that I guess we kind of forget that we're coming off of an era in the past couple hundred years where survival was needed throughout most of the world, and I think that's why a lot
Mm-hmm.
of the gifts and curses we've been given are surrounded by this need to survive, this need for determination. So
Yeah.
the question is, how do we transform that for, our children and the generations to come? But I also have a
Mm-hmm.
quick question, and can you think of any cultures, and I can think of a few that have a very good perspective on that balance and not going
Mm.
too far? Because I know personally for me, from my own lineages, I know that probably deep in the past, when times were better, there is some of that, but in the immediate branches, I can't really think of that. How about you?
Hmm. That's interesting. Yeah. Th- It, honestly, what popped up in my mind was the Chinese culture. And also, I'm just gonna straight say this. I feel like, a lot of these cultures that have preserved a lot of their information, like a lot of their ancient wisdom over time, um, I almost want to say a lot of this ancient information speaks to like having balance within energies. And I think it's like being able to kind of cultivate a self awareness that you can tap into yourself and know that, wait, maybe I am getting a little bit imbalanced, or maybe I am like, what's the word? Like almost becoming inauthentic in a way, like
Yeah.
losing an authentic aspect of yourself or an essence of yourself. But as I'm thinking about it, I can't really think of any other examples of like
No, and I
maybe
think that that's
cultures that
perfect that
have.
you. I think that's perfect that you can't because I think that that's part of the
Yeah,
problem. That there is so
yeah.
little to draw from. Like I know we had discussed prior to coming on here, like my trip to Hawaii, really showed me like this very huge sense of balance, and I think
Mm,
that the indigenous Hawaiian people really had a way of expressing that in most of the Pacific
mm-hmm,
Island region, which is ironically, some of that is a branch off of some Asian culture. But I
mm-hmm.
think that they have such a great preservation as well of their history, of their lineage,
Yeah.
of their land. I think that they are able to access those times where there was peace, where there was community, where
Mm-hmm.
there was harmony, and they were able to relax into that a little bit better.
Yeah, and you know
Um,
what? I do have to say, to add on to what I was saying, I feel like a lot of these indigenous cultures and this wisdom actually was buried though, and it was like, the
hmm.
burning of the books, and it was like this kind of obscuring of this information that was speaking to living in balance with nature and living in
No,
balance with
and I
yourself and
mean,
community.
you
Yeah.
look across the world and you look at to when certain sects of religion were brought to other areas where indigenous lived. I mean, the
Mm-hmm.
primary thing that was done was complete destruction of their culture and their societies. It
Right.
was, burning of their ancient wisdom. It was getting rid of all of these things that had them have these
Mm-hmm.
attachments. So,
Re-education.
exactly.
Yes.
Just I don't know if we might have had this discussion, but I had this trip to Mexico City recently, and people forget how much indigenous knowledge comes out of Mexico because I don't think it's the
Yeah.
preliminary thing they think of when they think of Mexican culture. But I was
Yeah.
just so profound to find out that, Mexican and indigenous Aztec and Mayan and all of those lineages, they had so much wisdom of, how do I put this? You think of these cultures of being like super primitive. You think of things of like, you know, cutting out hearts and doing all of these things, and I think a lot
Mm-hmm.
of people are misconceived because they actually are now finding information that they weren't necessarily always sacrificing and cutting out hearts. They were actually performing open heart surgery. And that was the
Mm-hmm.
miscommunication that was being seen there that was so
Well,
advanced to the people that came there that they were like, no, they must be doing some primitive ritual, when in actuality, they were performing medicine well beyond their time. And all that
that's
information has
wild.
kind of been lost. And I think that we also know, too, that a lot of the indigenous area had a lot of Chinese medicine type knowledge that we share. They have
Mm-hmm.
practice of herbalism. They even had practice of an acupuncture like system. So it's
Yes.
interesting to hear about how all that has then therefore been lost.
Yes, there's a book that's about Mayan medicine and also how it's a comparison of like Chinese medicine and Mayan medicine, how they're very, very similar and they have like very similar concepts and acupuncture and cupping and like abdominal massage, which is like super interesting. But it does go to show that like I had a couple thoughts as you were speaking. Um, the one thing that really wants to come through, I don't know if it is like an ancestor that wants me to say this, but it's like when we are living our gifts, when we are living our purpose, when we are expressing our voice, let's just say, that is an expression or an imprint of our ancestors. Because we are a living ancestor. Think about this. We are the living prayers of the ancestors before us. And so for us to actually like live out our lives and to like live out our purpose is to honor them, is to say like, you know, there's this quote by Maya Angelou that says, "When I walk in a room, 1,000 steps come before me." Like you are stepping into a space, whatever you're doing, with your ancestors before you. All the actions, all the things that they thought, all the ideas that were in their heart is moving with you, is in you, and is a force. And so we have to remember that, like when we are remembering our lineage and when we are reclaiming it and integrating it into our lives, we are doing it with so much support and so much guidance. And so I think, I don't know from your experience if you felt this, but when I started reconnecting with my lineage, I felt so much support. It was like opening up doors that I like had never felt before, but it was like this unconditional love. And the support that I can't even put a name onto, but it just feels like a hug. It feels like there's you have something behind you that is supporting you and pushing you forward. And I also want to say and comment on the Mayan culture and the Aztecs and like the deep like indigenous wisdom in the lands of Mexico and in the peoples there. It's like they were so close to the stars and the sun, right? Like the sun gods, like it was such an integral part of their culture. And I also want to say that a lot of these like ancient wisdom and these indigenous cultures were connected to the land. Like I think there's something that I learned recently. And I think it's been my own personal realization, but in modern day spirituality, I think I was getting a little bit into my head, like too heady about it,
As we tend to do.
as we tend to do, which is, it happens. And I realized that the disconnect was that I was actually using that to look away from the root, like the root chakra, which is like being connected to the earth, being connected to plants, being connected to the cycles of nature. Like those things innately also connect us to our ancestry as well. So I think when we do have these roots of um, trauma that have happened, occurred in our ancestry or lineage, in our culture, oftentimes we could have this root or sacral um, like trauma that's held in those spaces of our body, like in our hips, in our wombs, in our like sexual reproductive areas, because it's holding all of this like I just want to name it like pain that
Yeah.
has occurred over thousands of years that have been, happened to our ancestors. And when you are called to reconnecting, there are times where you do have to sit with that pain. There are times where you do have to sit with that the trauma that has happened not only to you, but is something that's linked to your ancestry. And I know that's been my case for sure, is like sitting with things that have happened in my womb space, and that is connected to my grandma and the woman before her. Like it's things that kind of unravel at the same time while you are unraveling the ancestral joy and the ancestral wealth that's there, because it's all connected. It's all connected.
No, I'm so excited because you just like, you just sparked off so many ideas and thoughts in my head. And I think the first one I want to get out of the way before I even forget it is that it was so important that you just stated that, that these bodies, the life we're inhabiting, is our ancestors, because that's what
Mm,
we come from. And so we're embodying them just by existing. And I think that a lot of us have this struggle with allowing joy and pleasure into our life due to this lack of thinking we deserve it or
yes.
it's a space that we should step into. So I think it's a great way of reframing in that, if you don't want to do joy and pleasure and happiness and love for yourself, why not experience those things to give them to your ancestors? Because you
Mm,
experiencing them is them experiencing joy, is them experiencing love. So honor them that way, because again, a lot of
yes.
times we have a hard time doing that for self. Um, and I think another really important thing that you stated was that, a lot of people when they go on these spiritual journeys, when they awaken, ugh, I hate that word, but then when they awaken, um, they tend to get way too much in the headspace and they have this form of disconnection that comes with it that we forget no matter if you believe you are soul, that you believe you are spirit, that we're ascending to higher places, etc., etc. At the end of the day,
Mm,
you are still this physical body. You are still having to operate in this reality. So it's important to
right.
reconnect to that. And, one of the biggest reconnection is our ancestry, as you did state. And so, with the root and sacral chakra being so integrally related to our ancestry and to our past, I think that's why we're seeing, we both work as healthcare workers. I think that's why we're seeing so many physical manifestations due to lack of connection to these parts of ourselves. I mean, I think we have
Totally.
so many chronic pain conditions and just pain in general, because if you really think about it, what is pain other than your physical
Mm.
body screaming out, like, pay attention to me, like, be in this
Mm.
body? Like, that is pain, is your body
Yes.
saying to be here. And then
Yes.
secondly, the sexual health things. I mean, fertility has gone to, what, nobody has a proper relationship with sex. Things in the
Mm-hmm.
womb space have just been completely, I think they said something recently like 10% of sperm coming from a man is actually able to reproduce now, where it should obviously be at 100%. Testosterone levels have dropped by, like, I think they say like 150%. And just, I think this
Wow.
disconnection from sexuality is also coming from, some of these deeply seated problems with our ancestry. Because again,
Mm-hmm.
what is our ancestry other than our reproduction? Because lack of access to these parts of us means there is no
Mm-hmm.
ancestry to come after us. So I
Yeah.
think that that is so integrally connected. And I think it's so important to start healing and addressing, because otherwise, I don't think we're going to heal through these parts.
Yeah, I love that you spoke onto this. And when we are talking about the impact to our own sexual health and to our sexuality and to our expression, I just want to say, like, our expression of our being, like, we each were born to experience life in all of its facets, whether it's, this joy or pleasure or just like going to live your life. It's not all about, I think it comes from a lot of societal and cultural programming that we've been told. And I just want to say the patriarchy that says, like, you are not here to experience joy. You're here to be a working being. Like,
Yeah.
hell no. Like, that is not, that has been highly, highly programmed as a common theme to just be a part of, and that's how you're accepted in society, when you're this working being and you work 40 hours and you got the status job. Like, no, I think where we're at right now in this time and space, we're reclaiming back the desire, we're reclaiming back joy, we're reclaiming back, like, no, it is okay to be in my body, it is okay to experience and feel, like, and want the things that I want. And I think for so long that those things have been kind of used. I almost want to say, like, the lack has been almost weaponized and has been almost commoditized and capitalized on. And I think that is a big part of, like, the patriarchal, the highly toxic masculinity, the highly toxic patriarchal society that has told us that, no, your joy and your pleasure and the things that you want, like, put that aside. Like, these even in, like, big religion, like when you think about Buddhism, the fundamental thing in Buddhism is, like, let go of all desires. All attachment is the root of your suffering. Like, is that actually true? Like, can you sit with that? And does that feel aligned to you? Like, I think for so long, I grew up Buddhist, and so, I grew up with a
Continue on, but
lot.
you're touching base on so many things. I'm so excited that
Yes.
you are. So keep going.
Yes. So, like, it's like I grew up with that. And so, like, as I grew up and when I became more, like, aware of these things that I was, these stories and these beliefs that I was running in my mind, in my subconscious, in my body, I realized that a lot of those things were are not aligned. Like the hustle culture, right? The things that I learned from directly from my lineage was not aligned to me as a being now. Like, the things that I learned within religion, that I needed to be detached from my pleasure, like, was not aligned to me, and I think this is all to reclaim back the power of our ancestors, which was being connected to nature, being connected to joy, being connected to community and relationship. Like, those things are inherent and free. Those things are not naturally commoditized and capitalized on. So
Well,
yeah, I'm
and I
curious to
think
know what
this
you
is
think.
why I know we're just on the same wavelength because I was about to go in your direction from my lineage perspective, and it's just so crazy that you already
Yes.
went there.
Let's
So
go there.
to discuss that, I'm gonna first prelude everything I'm about to say with I love Jesus Christ, awesome dude. I don't necessarily love some of his followers. Let's leave it at that. And I think that
Mm.
that's when you look at my lineages, the Italian, the Irish, and the African, they all actually have in recent times some form of Catholicism at their predominant, some form of Catholicism that's at their forefront. But the
Hmm.
Catholicism that has kind of been brought into the present day arena with them is very patriarchal. It is very control based. It is very having all the issues you just said with Buddhism. It has all of those issues. And I don't know if they were originally integral to the religion because if we look again at the teachings of actual Jesus Christ, it was simply to
Hmm.
just, love your neighbor. It was these simple teachings of that you can do what he does and that you are able to live this way in balance and harmony with nature and your community and with all of these things. So I don't know how
Hmm.
it's I know how it's gotten to be where it is, but we won't go on that tangent right now. But it's just so ironic that it has been turned into this way that it has. And I think that radiates down to the American culture too, with this religion
Hmm.
being so predominant in it. And the form of it that is so predominant is this very, let go of your desires, your sins, if you will, let go of these things
Hmm.
that bring you pleasure and joy. And of course, I'm not saying to just be completely give into those because we're talking about balance here at the end of the day. But there is
Hmm.
a form of shame that comes up if you completely
Yes.
deny all these things, which I don't think that we need to be going into. So
Right.
I think the other part that I wanted to expand upon when we discussed this is that my Italian, Irish, and African roots, like I just stated, in present day have this form of Catholicism at their forefront. And that's not what I was directly raised in, but I at least had the knowledge therefore of. My parents neither pushed really anything on me. They were kind of just chill with just about
Go for
anything.
it.
But that being said, um, I think that the thing that I was craving my entire, upbringing was, a connection to magic. And I think magic is the only
Mm.
word I have to describe for what I mean. It is this connection to nature. It is this connection to, um, something beyond us, the paranormal, like all of those things that encompass
Hmm.
that. And I've always wondered why did I have this just deep need to explore that, to be that, to express that. When you look at my lineages, and it's Catholicism, it's this very routine separation from that, and then when I finally looked a few generations deeper in all directions, I looked into the African lineage a few steps back, and you see things like hoodoo, you see things like ancestor worship, you think things like the orishas, and I'm like, oh shit,
Yes.
that's what I was looking for. And then you look at my Irish lineage, and you see things like Celtic paganism, and you see things like connection to like figures like Odin and Thor and Loki, which actually have
Hmm.
mythological lore in those cultures. And then last but not least, you even look far enough back into the Italian and you think of all the Roman gods and all the Roman goddesses. Those came from a
Hmm.
place of magic as well. And again, they're a little bit
Yes.
further back and a few steps back, but they were when we had a little bit better understanding of our connection to nature and our connection to something beyond us. And I think
Hmm.
that although Catholicism had plenty of gifts to give us and the teachings of Jesus had plenty of things to offer, I think we went very far in the wrong direction of disconnecting it from these ancestral teachings to these
Yeah.
teachings of nature and these teachings of, and don't get me wrong, I think it was completely by intent. But that being said, I think this separation has caused major issues in our not only
Hmm.
our society but in all these health things that we discuss.
Yeah. No, I love what you're talking about in terms of like getting separated from this from spirit. Like the spirit, the spiritual aspect that is inherent in nature, that is inherent um in all things, like in ourselves. And I feel like these early indigenous wisdom, the Native American medicine, very much has like spirit as a forefront. Like being connected to spirit is, and their ancestors and the star people is what, is inherent. And I feel like culture nowadays, medicine nowadays, we can just dive into the medicine aspect, even Chinese medicine has been very much taken away from its spiritual roots. And to me, when I was in school for Chinese medicine, I was missing that. Like, I was like, where is the spirit? Like, where are we learning about how to connect to the spirit, how to heal the spirit, how to, work through the spirit? Like, to me, that has always been a very fundamental part of life, medicine, all things, because it is the things that we can't see. I mean, quantum physics is now saying that like 99% of everything is literally space and is filled with energy. Like, if we are not operating and learning from that energetic perspective, then we're only focusing on the 1%, which is like the physical matter of how things manifest. But we're not actually focusing on the 99%, which is energetics, which is how spirit works through all things. And I feel like we've been taken so far away from that, even in my own personal life now. Like, there is this like almost want to like separate myself from spirituality, because there's something in like, I think it's just modern day spirituality, new age spirituality has gone so far off.
Goes so
it
far off,
it
and
goes
the
so far
reputation
off.
association with that is hard to have, but go on.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And it gets so far away from like, you are just at this, you're gonna learn all these crazy like new age spirituality things and concepts, but then at the next moment, like the next hour, you're like a totally human being doing human things, needing to like eat lunch. It's like
Well,
there's a
and
huge disconnect there.
and that was kind of for me the intent of this podcast, and it's something I can now finally verbalize and put into words. Is that there's two major things. Is one, I see very few people in this spiritual space, if you will, who are doing this in a very down to earth, approachable, and integratable way. And
Mm-hmm.
two, I see very few people in this space that look like me and you. And I know that seems superficial, but it's
Yes.
important. And in two aspects is not only our ethnicities and the races that we come from, but also the age that we are. We're a little bit
Mm-hmm.
younger, even though we're getting up there now. I see a lot of these gatekeepers as these people in their like 50s and 60s and 70s who, kind of set the foreground, and I'm grateful for that, but it does still feel like a very unapproachable space for the youth
Mm-hmm.
right now, because there is these difficulties of just not being able to connect and understand. And that's something I've had such a struggle within this space, is having nobody that
Mm-hmm.
looks like me, nobody that is in my demographic, nobody that, and so I'm trying to create that space to the best of my ability, going off of pretty much nothing. And
Mm-hmm.
last but not least, if I don't say this, it's gonna drive me crazy. But when you were pointing out, all the indigenous connections to nature and how important that was, it really got me thinking even further about how I just, spoke of the Irish deities of, Odin and Thor, the African Orishas, the Italian Roman pantheon. You know what all of
Mm-hmm.
those things have in common? The commonality among all of them is all of these deities were just personifications of nature. And it really
Mm-hmm.
does represent how important those pieces were to those cultures. And, people get to think, were these gods like actual entities, actually things? They could have been. Not against that theory, but I also think they were really representations of how important living in balance and harmony with nature was. I think that's why all these deities had these wraths, or these huge conspiracies or problems or issues. It wasn't
Mm-hmm.
because these deities were mean or evil or wrong. It's because if you didn't live in balance with these natural elements, you were going
Mm-hmm.
to see chaos, destruction, and problems.
Yes, yes, I love that so much. And, I feel like in the recent past, I've reclaimed a lot of like this goddess, divine feminine wisdom as well. And that's deeply connected me to my own matriarchal lineage of like, well, what does it mean to be connected so deeply to to nature in nature's fullest form? Because when we think about the goddesses or we think about these deities, they're multifaceted, multidimensional. They're connected to these higher virtues that we also as humans can connect to: compassion, healing, love, like, these things that we can experience as human beings, that we are so capable in tapping into and fusing that into our daily being and our work and our relationships. I think that you're right in that these deities, these goddesses, these gods are personifying our own human experience, our own human story. And that's something to just always remember, because you could go down the path of like, these are just myths that were told. And very much so, these are stories that were created by, who knows, maybe channeled by, you know, different
Yeah.
people in their cultures, or created for the humans to understand their own experience even a little bit more,
Yeah.
and yeah, so let's talk about how we can actually integrate and bring
Why
some
are
of
you
these
always up at
tools.
wavelength? I was just about to say that to you, beating me to the punch here. Well, that being said, with us getting close to being on the hour here, I think it's important to
Yeah,
point out, I think we need to have a part two to this regardless. I think there's still so
totally.
much we could discuss, and I'm not
Mm-hmm.
surprised with how we are able to encompass a lot here, that there isn't still a lot more to this topic since the deep one. So I'm already going to
Yeah.
declare a part two for this. And so
Yes.
I will end or start wrapping up with, a way to integrate and connect with my ancestry. I'll leave it with just one way for now. And the
Mm-hmm.
way for me that I have found most integral and important is cooking the foods that my ancestors cooked,
Ooh.
or cooking the foods that
Yes.
they, made a staple or made famous to. And I think that the reason why it's so connective is because not only are you having the experience of physically doing something that they did, I mean, we might be using different tools
Mm-hmm.
or different appliances or things along those lines, but not only are you doing that, so you're having like this physical, process of something that they had once done. But then when you consume that food, you're also having the sensory experience of something that they once experienced as well. And there's
Mm-hmm.
so much that comes to that. And then last but not least, we all know how smell is so integrally connected to memory and the brain and to neurology in general. It's that you're able to
Mm-hmm.
smell things that they once smelled. So I don't think what better connection then can you make to your past than experiencing something olfactory wise that's in the same presence. So
I love
for
that.
anyone listening that has African roots, there's a show on Netflix called High on the Hog, is what it's called, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a show that shows how African cooking shaped America. And it will really, really blow your mind. Everything from mac and cheese to chicken wings to oysters. They were all basically African. Even rice being an American staple, they were basically all African traditions because the slaves
Mm.
were the ones mostly making the food, so that's how they became American staples. So it's a great show that
Yes.
highlights a lot of that, and I think it's a great place for people to start.
I I'm in love with that. Like I love that. Like food, herbs, like incorporating those things, and even like something as simple as like things that your parents made, or maybe like an herb that they cooked to make tea, like I was for me it's these simple spices like star anise, or coriander, or like cilantro, like these herbs and spices that are incorporated in the cuisine. Is I love that, because food is also such a big part of culture and also medicine. For me, I would say my tool would be to cultivate a space, like as just, and it doesn't have to be like a huge room, but cultivating a space where you can, almost like an altar. This is very common in Asian cultures to have an altar, but primarily growing up as a Vietnamese, in a Vietnamese household, we always had an altar with our ancestors. And you don't have to do like go out all out on that, but it's the simple act of saying, I honor my ancestors and I offer something to them. So you could even put in this space, it could even be like, a drawer next to your bed. You can just put like flowers or something next to your bed and have that be sort of an offering to the people who came before you. Or, it doesn't have to be a big gesture, but it can just be creating some sacred space. And it's a physical reminder of your connection to people before you. Um, and yeah, I would say that would be my
No,
my
I appreciate
suggestion,
you
my
sharing
tool.
that. My husband had lost an aunt of his, actually the youngest of the family, only 37, from cancer, and he was having a
Mm,
really hard time digesting and processing that because she was so young. Um,
yeah,
and I think we kind of together, but I propose some of these more traditional practices of like how do you reconnect them with that energy and how do you honor that and how do you help heal that? And I think we forget
mm-hmm,
how simple something like you just said can be healing, because we just
yeah,
moved into a new house and one of the first thing he did was set up an altar to his aunt. And I think that it was just
mm,
such a way for him to not only honor his aunt, but just a greater connection to something. And I think
yeah,
that we forget how little these simple practices can just accumulate and make such a huge difference. So I thank you
yes.
for sharing that because I've noticed that to be very powerful for people.
Yes, I got chills as you said that. Like just honoring the ancestors, but also honoring our connection to something greater than us.
Yeah,
Love that, love that. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today on this episode. It was amazing to dive in, and we're gonna do it. We're definitely doing a part two. So
I know. I can't wait. There's so many tangents now that we can go on, but I'm very happy that we started the way that we did.
I know, I know, I know. I'm so excited for the next episode. Thank you everyone for joining us and tune into the next episode.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.